Let's talk about protecting your pool skimmer from damage over the winter season. Of all the parts of your swimming pool you don't want to have a problem with, this is the one. And it's actually pretty easy to happen. The truth is that a lot of swimming pool owners out there will experience some form of damage with their skimmer over the winter season. Damage to a pool skimmer, it's kind of one of these can of worms situations, depending on the kind of swimming pool you have. Like, let's talk about a vinyl liner pool. A lot of the times with a vinyl liner pool, especially with an older liner, if you need a new skimmer, now you need a new liner too. One goes, with the other. So it really it forces your hand, and that's kind of no pool owner likes that. Nobody likes to get forced into, sudden expensive repairs, but that's what could happen. With a concrete pool, you're not going to have to redo the entire interior surface when you need a new skimmer, but you are going to spend a lot of money. A concrete pool skimmer commonly would be encased in a solid cube of concrete, like 2 foot or 3 foot thick and deep and wide. And it's quite a bit of concrete and a lot of work to jackhammer that out and install the new skimmer and then surround that with concrete as well, which anchors it to the pool wall. So again, you're talking big bucks if you have a problem with your skimmer. So what are you going to do aside from winterizing it properly, which I suppose just means evacuating all of the water from the pipe and from the skimmer body itself? But at that point, there are some things that you can do, some, optional extras, you could call it, and they don't cost a lot and they're really easy to do. And I highly recommend you do them. Let's talk about them now. So the first one is foam rope, or backer rod is the name for it. It's a closed cell foam product. I don't have any to show you right now. Mine's all out there protecting swimming pools for the winter. But I think you all know what backer rod is, or foam rope. If you can imagine a pool noodle, but about the size of your thumb. That's about what you're looking for there. And you're going to take about 12-inch long sections of this foam rope or backer rod. And when you winterize the plumbing line for your skimmer, you're going to blow out the skimmer and the pipe that feeds it. Before you go ahead and plug that, you're going to feed some of this foam rope down into that open port. And the idea here is that this is an extra layer of protection. If you end up with a bunch of water inside of that pipe for whatever reason, the hope is that the backer rod will help to protect you from freeze damage. And it's actually pretty darn good at doing that job. And that can work in both the rear port or the front port. If you have a front port on your skimmer, which usually indicates an equalizer line, those are notoriously hard to winterize, like almost impossible to winterize. And a lot of the time, that foam rope or backer rod that we're feeding in there, that's going to be the only level of protection you have against freeze damage to your skimmer. So again, that's the very first thing that you look towards when you want to protect your skimmer and go that extra mile. Foam rope into any pipe that you blow out, or even the ones that you don't, like the front port on the skimmer, because you can't really blow them out. So foam rope, use it. It's good stuff. Let's talk about antifreeze. I have other videos where I talk about technically you don't need antifreeze to properly winterize a pool, and that's true, but I do recommend to use it. Swimming pool antifreeze is very affordable. It's a couple of dollars for a big old jug of it, and I recommend you use it. Use a whole bunch of it when you're winterizing your skimmer specifically. Put some into the pipe that you've winterized and that you're going to add some foam rope to, but also add some to the skimmer body itself once you've plugged that open port. And the idea here is that we accept that water will probably find its way back into the skimmer body during the winter season for one reason or another. And the hope is that adding a whole bunch, maybe a couple of liters or a half gallon of antifreeze to the skimmer body itself will be sufficient to dilute any water that ends up finding its way in there, such that it won't freeze, or if it does freeze, it doesn't freeze solid. So using antifreeze is a great idea. I pretty much use like a whole 4-liter or 1-gallon jug for every skimmer that I'm winterizing, and I recommend that you do as well. Let's talk about the gizmo. The gizmo, if you don't know what that is, look at that. I got one right here. This is a gizmo. I think it's a proprietary name, but it's just basically an empty pop bottle that you're going to put in, and there's some threads on here, and you apply a thread sealant and thread it into the bottom port of the skimmer. And the idea here is that this is going to give the ice that forms inside of your skimmer something to crush inwards on, as opposed to blowing outwards on the walls of your skimmer and blowing your skimmer to pieces. And here's the tip. These things are great. I highly recommend you use one. Every year you should do this check. Shake it. Did you hear anything? If you hear any water, you have to get rid of it. When these fail, the seam will break, and then it will, have some water inside of it. But that failure indicates that the product is no longer good. It's no longer able to do its job. These things are a couple of dollars. Pick one up. If yours looks funky at all, if it's cracked or collapsed, or especially if you can hear water inside of it, it's garbage. Go ahead and get yourself another one. So now let's talk about what else you can do. So we talked about, using a gizmo, and we talked about using some foam rope and some antifreeze. Here, we've got another example here. Something I like to do is take one of these big jugs of antifreeze, leave some in there, and we've got a little bit in the bottom. And I like to take this and jam it into the skimmer mouth and just leave it inside of there. If you have a wide mouth skimmer, you can get it in sideways. Otherwise, you can normally feed it in like that. And what you're doing is you're just occupying some space here. And if it's wedged in place, it won't float away once your water level raises over the winter season. The idea here, again, being that we want to provide something to crush inwards on, as opposed to the water freezing and pushing outwards on the skimmer. The skimmer is just plastic, PVC or ABS, depending on your skimmer. And it's just not made to absorb those kinds of forces. Like freezing water is incredibly destructive, and we have to account for it. So one more thing that you can do. We've done a great job of protecting the skimmer so far. I think there's one more thing that we can do, which is to say the skimmer body itself. Right now it's just sitting there empty with a couple of liters, perhaps a gallon or two even of antifreeze sitting down on the bottom, and you've got a skimmer or a gizmo installed in as well. But the main body is still empty, and it would serve you well to fill that up with empty pop bottles. That would be my recommendation, and especially if you can jam them in there so they're not all just going to float away. Commonly, what might happen is a swimming pool technician would add a winterizing kit to a swimming pool. It's a common procedure. A lot of people choose to go that route. In doing so, you have 3 some odd extra empty bottles when you're finished from the chemicals which you've just added to the pool. A lot of times you will take those empty bottles and you'll just stuff them into the skimmer body. Again, we're just aiming to occupy some space that otherwise water is going to take up. And in doing so, we provide something for that ice to crush inwards on, as opposed to pushing outwards. And if you're like, well, but we already have the gizmo in there, why do we need that? And my logic is these empty bottles couldn't possibly serve a better purpose than helping to protect your skimmer from thousands of dollars of damage. And I say go the extra mile. Add the foam rope, add lots of antifreeze, add empty antifreeze bottles, add a big bottle into the mouth itself or the throat of the skimmer itself. And then you've done everything that you can do to protect the skimmer from damage. And most likely, this skimmer is going to be A-okay come the springtime. If you found this information helpful, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can check out my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com.